Happy Monday, faithful listener. This is Jen here with P40ministries.com. So I wanted to talk to you guys about something. There is a way that you can let everybody know about this podcast without sharing it to your social media. And that is to give it 5 stars on whatever platform you are listening on, or to like it. That helps me get found by other people. And that would be super appreciated if you guys could either like this podcast episode or if you could rate it 5 stars. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. We are going to be talking about Genesis chapter 22, verses 15 through 24, and this is the end of the chapter. Now, to recap, Abraham went on the mountain and did a test. God gave him a test, and this was a type of test that would have to change Abraham. It wasn't just like a written test, like how we think of the word test in English. This was a bigger, more advanced test that would result in Abraham changing in some way. So God puts Abraham through this test, and he tells him, "Sacrifice your son Isaac to me." Now, God never had any intention of actually allowing Abraham to sacrifice his child, because God actually hates children sacrifices, and we find that out later on in, I believe, the Levitical law. We find out that God absolutely hates human sacrifices, so he never had any intention of allowing Abraham to really follow through on this human sacrifice, but he wanted to see how Abraham would react and what kind of change Abraham would go through. Now, Abraham ended up having so much faith in God that he believed that God could raise his son from the dead, or that God would just provide a lamb for the sacrifice instead of making him sacrifice Isaac, because that is what he said to Isaac on the way up the mountain. He said, God is going to provide a lamb for us. And that's exactly what God does. God tells Abraham, don't you dare lay a finger on that child. I have seen your faith, and I know how you reacted, and here is a lamb for the sacrifice. So he provides a lamb for the sacrifice. Abraham finds this ram caught in some bushes. So he takes the ram and he sacrifices it to God. So now God responds in verse 15 of Genesis chapter 22, and I will read to the end of the chapter. Then the angel of the Lord called again to Abraham from heaven. This is what the Lord says: because you have obeyed me and you have not withheld even your son, your only son, I swear by my own name that I will certainly bless you. I will multiply your descendants beyond number, like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will conquer the cities of their enemies, and through your descendants, all the nations of the earth will be blessed, all because you have obeyed me. Then they returned to the servants and traveled back to Beersheba, where Abraham continued to live. Soon after this, Abraham heard that Milcah, his brother Nahor's wife, had borne Nahor 8 sons. The oldest son was named Uz. The second oldest was Buz, followed by Kemuel, the ancestor of their Arameans, Kesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. Bethuel became the father of Rebekah. In addition to these 8 sons from Milcah, Nahor had 4 other children from his concubine Remuel. Their names were Tabah, Gaham, Tahash, and Makah. That was a mouthful, you guys. That was really hard for me to say all those names, and I really doubt I got them correct. But we are now going to discuss what God says to Abraham. So God calls down to Abraham from heaven, and he says, Abraham, because you have obeyed me, and you have not withheld even your only son, I swear by my own name that I will certainly bless you. So God had already promised Abraham a blessing, but now God is adding to this blessing. He says, not only are you going to have descendants that multiply in number, but they are going to conquer the cities of their enemies. So they're going to be a strong people, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed because of them, all because you obeyed me in this one thing. So if you didn't listen to Friday's podcast episode, definitely go back and do that. I probably should have mentioned that at the beginning of this episode, but go back and do that, because I really go into depth about why God calls Isaac Abraham's only son, and also why God made Abraham go through this test to begin with. So I really go into more detail with that, and it's definitely worth listening to if you want to really understand this episode today. But God says in verse 17, I am certainly going to bless you because you followed through on this thing that I've asked you to do, and you didn't even withhold your son from me, your only son, which is a picture of Jesus Christ, which is what I talked about on Friday. And because you didn't withhold your son from me and you love me that much, I'm going to be blessing you beyond what you can even imagine. Your descendants are going to be a great people. They are going to conquer the cities of their enemies, and through your descendants, all the nations of the earth will be blessed, all because you have obeyed me. Now imagine what that means. Think about what that means in verse 18. All the nations of the earth are going to be blessed through your descendants. So, as a Gentile, I am Italian. I am not a Jew, and I don't come from any Jewish background that I know of, at least not on my mom's side. My dad's side is questionable. But as a Gentile woman, I am blessed because of the Jewish people. And that is because Abraham's bloodline produced Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ took away my sins personally. Just think about that. On a personal level, Jesus came down to take away the sins of everyone, of you, of me, of my sister, of my mom and my dad, personally taking away every single person's sins. Everyone is blessed because of Abraham's descendants, because Jesus was the one who came from Abraham's descendants. That is why everyone is blessed through Abraham's bloodline. He helped produce Jesus Christ, who came to take away the sins of the world. And that is why we are blessed, because of the Jewish people and because of Abraham's obedience here to God, that he wouldn't even withhold his only son from God. So after all this happens, Abraham goes through this complete change, and they return to the servants that were waiting at the bottom of the mountain, and they go back to Beersheba, where Isaac, Sarah, and Abraham were living. And after this, Abraham hears that Nahor, his brother, who he left many, many years ago, he hears that his sister-in-law, Milcah, gave Nahor 8 sons. So Nahor had a lot of kids, and he had also 4 kids from this concubine named Rumah, maybe it is. And why do you think this is put in the Bible? Well, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's because Isaac is probably getting near to the age where he might have to start thinking about his future with a wife. So Abraham hears about all these sons, all these nephews that he has from his brother, and their kids and their daughters. And one of them is named Rebekah. And Bethuel is the father of Rebekah, so that is one of Abraham's nephews. And you remember, culturally, it was still okay for families to intermarry. God had not gotten rid of that yet. The law didn't exist yet. So it was okay for families to intermarry, and that is often what happened. So Abraham is thinking about his son Isaac's future with one of these women who is from the same bloodline. And we will definitely talk more about that, I believe, in the next chapter. But until then, I'm going to ask that you not only like this podcast episode, but also that you go to my Facebook page, www.facebook.com/P40Ministries, and maybe like the Facebook page if you so choose, because I do a lot of updates on my Facebook. And one of them is this podcast is now available on Audible and on Amazon Music, which is brand new, and that is so exciting for me. So you can now listen on one of those 2 platforms. I announced that on my Facebook page and on the podcast today, but I do a lot of announcements on the Facebook that don't often get moved into the podcast. So definitely like the Facebook page as well. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. I will see you tomorrow at 6 a.m. and we will be discussing Matthew chapter 9 and talking about that. So join me tomorrow at 6 a.m. And as I say at the end of every podcast episode, happy listening and God bless.